are you, Paula?
I'm okay, lady.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to P&P Live. Sorry we're getting a bit of a late start. We just had some weird glitches because the internet is unpredictable. But we're here now. I'm so excited that you guys are all here. My name is Brittany Kerfoot. I'm an events manager at Politics in Prose. And before we begin, I just want to go over a couple items with you. So the first thing, the most important thing, is a link to Lilly King's book is right below. It's the big green button. That goes directly to the Politics in Prose website. And we just so much appreciate your support during this crazy time. Independent bookstores are getting hit so hard, as I'm sure you can imagine. And also authors who have books coming out right now who planned a big tour, it's got to be tough. So we really appreciate your support. So click that button at any time and you get free shipping through at least April 15th. So feel free to stock up on puzzles and games and everything else. Secondly, if you have a question for really either of our authors tonight, you can click the Ask a Question button right below the Book Buy button. And you can also vote on questions that you would like to see answered the most. And then we'll read those in the order that they were voted on. So feel free to ask a question, again, anytime during this event. And then unlike our in-person events, no one can see you. So the only people who can see each other is who is on the screen. So please feel empowered to stay in your comfy clothes, your pajamas, get a glass of wine and get comfortable. We won't judge you. Finally, we just want to thank you for being here. I saw in the chat, some of you have said this is your third or fourth Politics in Prose virtual event, and we just, from the bottom of our hearts, just want to thank you for keeping us here. It's tough, but we want to provide our community with the great events that we were known for. We're just doing it in a new platform, so thank you so much. All right, on to tonight's event. I am so excited to get to introduce Lilly King this evening, as she is truly one of my writing heroes. I was lucky enough to get to read an advanced copy of Writers and Lovers a couple of months ago. And please note that I am probably the world's slowest reader. But when I say I got through this book in about 3 days, that is the fastest I've ever read. And it's because this book is that good. So definitely pick up a copy. You won't be disappointed. King is the author of 5 award-winning novels. And of this new book, the LA Times says, Writers and Lovers feels effortless, or at least like an unconscious natural process. King's sentences are like layers of silt and pebbles condensed into sedimentary rock, distinct from one another, but fitted into an indestructible whole. The book follows Casey, a smart but vulnerable protagonist, in the last days of her youth at a time when every element of her life is at a crisis. The book opens with Casey blindsided by her mother's sudden death and wrecked by a recent love affair, and follows her on her path to finish writing her novel, get a stable job, and find the love she's so desperately been seeking. Moderating tonight's event is Paula Mclean, author of the New York Times bestselling novels The Paris Wife and Circling the Sun. Her latest book, Love and Ruin, follows war correspondent Martha Gellhorn as she travels to Madrid to report on the atrocities of the Spanish War, and finds herself drawn to the stories of the ordinary people caught in the devastating conflict. We also hope you'll pick up some of Paula's books, which are available on our website, and you'll get free shipping with those as well. So now, without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to bring Lilly King and Paula Mclean onto your screens.
Hello.
Hi. So good to see you, Paula. And thank you so much, Brittany. And thank you so much, Politics in Prose, for having us.
Yeah, it's just a pleasure to be speaking with you, Lilly, anytime, but particularly about this book. It's just so, so, so wonderful. And an instant New York Times bestseller. But we met in 2015 when I was on tour for Circling the Sun, and you were promoting Euphoria. Also a magnificent book and a book club favorite and sort of a literary phenomenon. And that is set in 1933, Papua New Guinea. It's about, or at least inspired by a year in the life of Margaret Mead. So how do you go from that book, Euphoria, to Writers and Lovers? Like, how does that work?
It was kind of a long process, actually. Brittany, I should say, I think you're typing and I think your mic is on. Brittany?
Oh, and she's still doing it.
Yes. That's really funny. Wait, I think I need to text her. This is so funny. How can I text this and answer at the same time?
We'll wait.
Okay. Sorry. These are, kind of weird things. Okay. So I had this idea after Euphoria that I kind of wanted to keep on going with the writing things that I don't know sort of thing. And so my next idea was writing about a U.S. female soldier in Iraq. So I did a ton of research on that. I loved Euphoria because I loved all the research, and I loved just learning and being in a world that was unfamiliar to me. And I loved going on book tour and having people not ask me how much of it was
about yourself.
Exactly. It was just so nice. My whole book tour was about Margaret Mead and not about me. And I loved that part about it too. And it was just really, it was like an adventure. And so I wanted to go on another adventure. And I started out, I did lots of research, and I got about a chapter and a half in, and it just like died on me. It just wasn't, it wasn't alive. It wasn't alive. And so I had this other idea that I was very tempted by, and I started in on that. And that was about a male writer in 1902 traveling with his mother through Europe. And that actually, I did lots of research, many months of research, lots of notes, lots of ideas, a whole kind of outline-ish thing, and not really blow by blow, but in general, lots of profiles of various characters. And I was really excited about it. And I got about 20 pages into that. And then my mom died very, very suddenly, on vacation, in very good health, in about 2 hours, 2 phone calls, one saying that she was in a clinic and she would be fine, and then the next one saying that she had died. And that was a blow. I just, for whatever reason, I couldn't write fiction. I could never open up that notebook again. Like, that was over for me. That world, that life was gone. And I didn't really know what I would write. And I didn't write for months and months. I wrote in my journal, and, just was in a fog, just a fog. And then one day I just saw this novel. I just knew that I wanted to write about a young woman trying to be a writer. And I for a long time, I didn't know why I wanted that. And then recently I've started to realize that I think that time of that feeling so vulnerable by a death that happened so quickly, and kind of being shaken by life, to the core, was somehow echoed and was reminiscent of this other time in my life when I was, in my late 20s and early 30s, and feeling very vulnerable in a different way to life and life's whims, and feeling very raw. And I think something about the two times, like, we're talking to each other, and that time in my life when my life felt so uncertain, really came up to the surface in the form of this novel idea. And so that's sort of where it started. And
yeah. So it's so interesting to me, this idea that what you were working on before just fractured when your mother died, and it wasn't available to you anymore. And then this whole other world became fluid and in conversation with your current mindset. I read somewhere that this is the novel that you wrote for your younger self, and that you wish you had been able to read when you were in your 20s and 30s. What do you mean by that?
I feel like when I was that age, I was so eager for books about writers and for novels about writers. And so, I read Hunger by Knut Hamsun so many times, and A Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man by Joyce, and Hemingway's A Movable Feast, not fiction, but a lovely memoir. And there, I don't know, like Richard Ford's a sports writer, and Jay McInerney's Bright Lights, Big City. I felt like there were a lot of books coming out about by male writers writing about young men trying to be writers. And I gobbled them up and I read them over and over. And I realized that I didn't have one of those Bibles about a woman trying to be a writer. And since then, there have been some incredibly great books about women struggling to be writers. One I have right here, actually. My Name is Lucy Barton, which is just
one of my favorite of all time. Yeah.
And that is a great book about a woman becoming a writer. It's very, different road to becoming a writer. But back then there was nothing, and so there was probably something, but I never found it. And I think I had that in mind when I started in on this, just, wanting to write that story of what it felt like. And I feel like, it's very much a work of fiction, but I definitely draw a lot of the emotions that I had at that time in my life. I draw on those, all the characters and the dialogue and the scenes, they're all fictional, but a lot of those emotions that Casey feels were really stuff that I felt at that time in my life.
Yeah. So I would love to hear you read a little from the book before we get too much further. But is there something else that we need to say in order to set up Casey's story that maybe Brittany didn't mention, or something that you need to know about her and what's happening in her life when the novel begins?
Well, I was just going to read from the very beginning. So I'm not really sure you need to know much. I mean, maybe it would be helpful to know that it's 1997 and she's 31, but maybe that was already mentioned. And she's just arrived in Massachusetts after a devastating love affair at a writer's colony. And her mother has died a few months ago. And she's living, well, you're going to find this out, so I don't even need to tell you. And I'll just say that these sentences, this first paragraph is the very first thing that I wrote for this book. And I wrote it before anything else. I don't know if you do this, but, you get ideas and you start taking notes, and, you think maybe it could be a novel. And then you have to try it out. You have to find the voice. And so I wrote these sentences, just kind of like dipping my toe in the idea to see if there was a voice there. And
it stuck. That's amazing.
And I felt like, okay, I see it. I wrote these sentences, and the same thing happened with Euphoria. Exact, very beginning lines. Once I wrote those lines, I was like, okay, I see the voice, I see the book, I see the, I can see it. And that's always just a really exciting moment. And so I love reading this paragraph because I feel like, oh, it all started right here. So, all right, I have to take off my glasses first. I have a pact with myself not to think about money in the morning. I'm like a teenager trying not to think about sex, but I'm also trying not to think about sex or food or death, which means not thinking about my mother who died on vacation last winter. There's so many things I can't think about in order to write in the morning. Adam, my landlord, watches me walk his dog. He leans against his Benz in a suit and sparkling shoes as I come back up the driveway. He's needy in the morning. Everyone is, I suppose. He enjoys his contrast to me and my sweats and untamed hair. When the dog and I are closer, he says, "You're up early." I'm always up early. So are you. Meeting with the judge at the courthouse at 7 sharp. Admire me, admire me, admire judge and courthouse and 7 sharp. Somebody's got to do it, I say. I don't like myself around Adam. I don't think he wants me to. I let the dog yank me a few steps past him toward a squirrel squeezing through some slats at the side of his big house. So, he says, unwilling to let me get too far away. How's the novel? He says it like I made the word up myself. He's still leaning against his car and turning only his head in my direction, as if he likes his pose too much to undo it. It's all right. The bees in my chest stir. A few creep down the inside of my arm. One conversation can destroy my whole morning. I've got to get back to it. Short day, working a double. I pull the dog up Adam's back porch, unhook the leash, nudge him through the door, and drop quickly back down the steps. How many pages you got now? Couple of 100, maybe. I don't stop moving. I'm halfway to my room at the side of his garage. You know, he says, pushing himself off his car, waiting for my full attention. I just find it extraordinary that you think you have something to say. I sit at my desk and stare at the sentences I wrote before walking the dog. I don't remember them. I don't remember putting them down. I'm so tired. I look at the green digits on the clock radio, less than 3 hours before I have to dress for my lunch shift. Adam went to college with my older brother, Caleb. In fact, I think Caleb was a little in love with him back then. And for this, he gives me a break in the rent. He shaves off a bit more for walking his dog in the morning. The room used to be a potting shed and still has a loam and rotting leaves smell. There's just enough space for a twin mattress, desk and chair, and hot plate, and toaster oven in the bathroom. I set the kettle back on the burner for another cup of black tea. I don't write because I have something to say. I write because if I don't, everything feels even worse. Thanks. My audience of one.
Yay, she's got such a great voice. So I don't think you know this about me, but when I was 33, I quit a job teaching high school and started waiting tables, living on about $15,000 a year so I could write my first book.
Wow.
Yep.
I did not know that.
I did it exactly for all the reasons Casey is doing it in the novel. It's so I could have my mornings free and find a way to borrow or steal as much time as possible that I was writing. And it feels like that. But I also didn't have health insurance, and I didn't have a savings account, and I didn't have a net, and my family worried seriously for my mental health.
Yeah.
For my mental health. And I was also the divorced single parent of a 7-year-old at the time. So there were all these voices in my head, like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
What are you doing? This is irresponsible. And I hear Casey wrestling with all of those things too. Is this ever going to pay out? Am I being reckless with my life and not just my health? Because of course, Casey also doesn't have health insurance. And all these voices are getting very, very, very loud, intensified, of course, by the fact that she's just lost her mother and she feels like she's at a turning point, but then what's that thing that comes next? And I think that's a story we don't really know. I felt when I was reading this book that it was super, super fresh. The world of the restaurant, Iris, is so detailed and it's so specific, and all the characters in the novel. And it really kind of reminds me a little of Sweet Bitter by Stephanie Danler. Did you read that? But it's like Sweet Bitter for grown-ups. The character in Sweet Bitter is 22 or something in that novel, but Casey's 31. So let's talk about that difference. Well, like the risks that she's taking and this wager that she's making with the universe, what it costs to be an artist.
Yeah. Well, I mean, God, you are a lot braver than Casey because, you had a 7-year-old. I mean, that's intense. I mean, Casey, just has to worry about herself. So I can't even imagine that whole other layer. It's And thank God you did. Look at that. I mean,
yes. And thank God Casey takes the risk too. I mean, I was rooting for her so seriously in all the moments that she doubts herself and thinks she could have should have taken another path, or the moments when she begins to seriously wonder if she's getting her life wrong. Because we sometimes think that as young women, right? That we're getting it wrong, that we've taken a wrong turn, and that our real life is somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah. And I think for her, and for a lot of people at that age, there's this sense of, okay, here I am at the end of my youth, and somehow I have to get to the rest of my life, like it feels like there's something on the other side of this. And, I wasn't thinking, husband, children, like I think for me, and I do think for Casey too, it's not that cut and dried, but I think there's a stability, there's a safety, there's a sense of a real life that is not being lived somehow, and that everything feels too perilous, and somehow you have to get over this huge abyss and get to that other place,
right,
for the rest of your life.
But that is the artist's conundrum, because of course you have to live with so much uncertainty.
Yeah.
Almost perpetually,
I know.
There are no guarantees that it's ever going to pay out, and who's sitting above it all, with a big stamp saying, yes, you're the one who's going to work out. She has to take this incredible leap across that chasm to the next part of her life. And in the meantime, she wrestles with herself so colossally. Everything in her physical body is screaming, right? It's screaming that this doesn't feel right. And sometimes it doesn't.
Exactly.
Sometimes it doesn't. It's not like, people ask all the time, like, how do you know? Like, how do you know you're on the right track? How do you know this is all going to be worth it? And the fact of the matter is, you actually don't. And sometimes those voices keep on screaming.
Right.
The silence for a really long time.
Right.
So one of the things that Casey does when she's in this state is flip-flop between men. Oscar, the famous novelist. There's Luke, who's the sexy poet from the artist colony. And then there's the Silas, who is an aspiring writer like herself. And in a way, she sort of reminds me of Carrie in Sex and the City, right? Where she's trying to decide who she is based on her choice in men. And what is the right choice? Is it door number one? Is it door number two? But I honestly think that Casey's the struggle that she feels when she's trying to make a choice is much more connected to this larger idea. How do I get to that next place in my life? And can I get this wrong? Right? Can I make a colossal mistake here by choosing the wrong man? Do you think it's also a way of distracting herself from her feeling of imperilment?
Yes. And I also think, there's a lot of hormones going around. There's I think that she's, I think she's really trying to figure out kind of not just who is the safe bet and like who's the rock, because I think, without giving too much away, I think, there's a sense that one person is the rock and then maybe is not the rock, but also it's a lot about attraction, and how that drives each relationship and what that tells you within a relationship. And
right. what brings energy and what sucks energy, right? When you have to fake it, when you feel like the truest version of yourself.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then how she, you know, she very carefully doesn't read. They're both writers, right? And she doesn't read their work because she doesn't want the work to influence, you know, how she feels about them otherwise, and she knows it will, and you know, that's all very confusing too. Another layer to the relationship, you know.
Yeah. I don't know. I found it all delicious. I really did. And even the world of the artist colony that she goes to, we have some experience with this world. It was just so, I don't know. It was like a blast from the past. You know? And I don't think we get these worlds rendered in fiction very often. It was just absolutely delightful. And I think the novel is so beautiful, even just on a sentence level. I just found myself really, I don't know, I wanted to just reach out and thank you for just writing beautiful sentences and for caring so much about your craft. And I think the level of emotionality in the novel and the honesty, particularly when it's dealing with grief, and the rawness of grief in the novel, Casey wrestling with the loss of her mother. But it's not just Casey. All the major characters,
Right.
You know, been handed an incredible blow and lost somebody essential to their lives. Oscar has lost his wife. Silas has lost his sister. Luke, the sexy poet, has lost a child.
Yeah.
And can't get over it. And for Casey, this loss is so fresh, but also there's this idea that the suddenness of it, which you've already shared with us and been open about it, mirrors your own experience.
Yeah, it was really, I think just enough time had gone by that I could start processing that loss through fiction, you know, and in my fiction. And it was a really great place for me to put a lot of my emotions, you know, and it felt really good to be able to write a scene that I felt really took something that was in me, you know, kind of without words and without anything, but, you know, was a very strong feeling, and kind of get it up and out and into something different, but you know, evocative of the feelings that I had. I don't know why art is so useful in that way, but it really is, you know, for the writer, it's just such kind of a great therapy session, you know.
And an unexpected one, because what you were saying before about Euphoria, the hidden gift, the surprise of Euphoria was the way it took you out of your own life.
Yeah.
Like the hidden gift of this book is the way it brought you so deeply back to your own life.
Yeah. No, I think that's
yeah.
true.
Yeah. So there's a short chapter in the novel about authors and their dead mothers. So tell me how that came up.
So I had this idea initially that those vignettes about the writers who had lost their mothers would be, you know, there maybe be 5 or 6 or 7 of them, and they would be interspersed throughout the whole novel. And so, you know, you'd have a few scenes of just a few chapters of Casey, and then you'd have one of those. And I was writing the novel, and then on the side in a computer file, I was kind of writing those little segments, and I was planning all along to like fold them into each other, and, you know, and then I couldn't ever do that. There was no place for it. There was, it just didn't feel right. And so when I handed in the book to my agent and my editor, none of it was there. And then it was actually when we were in galleys, one set of galleys had already gone out. And I said to my editor, you know, I think I want to try to insert this chapter. And so I condensed all of my stuff, you know, to like 2.5 pages or something. And and at first, you know, we're like, God, can we? And I kind of found a place for it, and I mushed it in there. And at first we were like, no, it doesn't work. We pulled it out. And then a couple of days later, we were both, you know, like writing or texting each other, I think we should put it back in. So then we put it back in, and then it stayed. And I'm really glad it did. I really like it. I really like it. It's one of those kind of pull out, you know, things in a book that doesn't have to be there, and it doesn't, you know, doesn't necessarily tie. I mean, of course it ties in, but you could remove it, and it does go in sort of a different weird direction. But you know, it's 2.5 pages, so I think it works.
No, and I think it's generous of you to share too some of these ways that a book is cobbled together, and how sometimes it can be a great surprise to us, even when things are pretty far along, how it can still change. So just a few more questions, because I know that the audience would love to ask you questions as well. So the book is set in 1997. So how did you make that choice? And also, do you think it's different for a woman writing in the 1990s or writing now, or is it different to be a young woman coming of age the way that Casey is coming of age in the 90s as opposed to now?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that that back then, and even though it you know, it's not that, I mean, what is that, you know?
It feels like an awfully
years ago, but it does feel it was a different time for women. It just was, and I think for a woman to have ambition was not necessarily a normal thing, or a thing that you know, you said out loud. And I know that I just felt really ashamed. I mean, shame was my go-to emotion back then for sticking with writing when a lot of people didn't, you know, or you know, I don't know. They, you know, I mean, I have a ton of friends who did stick with it, and I don't know if they all felt shame, but I know I did, and I don't think that a woman with a dream now has as much shame for having that, and for you know, feeling like there's a profession that they really want to pursue. And I mean, it was happening, but I don't know. It seemed back then that there was such a difference between what was expected of a young woman and what was expected of a young man. And I felt like all the men I knew, you know, in their 20s and 30s, when I was in my 20s and 30s, had a lot of pressure on them to like be somebody and become somebody. And I didn't feel like we did, but now I feel like women and men have that pressure. And, you know, I mean, there are pros and cons with those kinds of expectations, you know.
This idea of shame or embarrassment, I did always sort of want to apologize, or I found myself qualifying every time I tried to explain to somebody what it was that I did. And my sister got me a bottle of nail polish that OPI made called I'm Not Really a Waitress, right? That was the color. Which I still, yes, I'm not really a waitress, because of course, right, we're something else, right? I'm really a writer, or I'm really a painter, I'm really, you know, an actress, or.
You're right, right.
Right, right.
I know, I remember being, you know, 32 and, you know, having to tell people. I remember one time going to visit my future mother-in-law, my boyfriend's mother, and going to like a cocktail party, you know, and she was sort of introducing me around, and I remember feeling so embarrassed that, you know, when people asked me what I did, that I was a waitress, you know. And then, I don't know, you know, really not wanting to say that I was writing a novel, which was just the kiss of death, you know.
But the scene that you read is so wonderful, you know, the way, you know, he uses the word novel as if I made it up, right? Yeah. terrific scene. I love Casey. I love this world. It's a beautiful novel. Congratulations. And I know this is a chance now for anyone who's you know, dipping in to spend some time with us to ask some questions. And I think Brittany at Politics and Prose is going to take over. But
can I just, you know, turn it around to you for a second? Tell me where you are with your, you know, what are you working on? How close are you to the end? That kind of thing. When can we expect another Paula Mclean?
Unfair, but I will say quickly that I'm sort of at the end of a new novel.
Congratulations! That's awesome.
The best part is when we know what's coming next, and it's much more difficult when somebody says, "What are you working on?" and you're like, "Actually, I have no idea." You know. Yeah, I'm delivering soon, within a couple of weeks.
Oh my gosh.
Although everything now, as we know, in the world is incredibly fluid, and hopefully it'll be out in the spring of next year. So thanks for
so exciting.
Thank you.
Can you tell us anything about it?
Not a thing.
Okay, very good.
Not a thing. Yeah. Thank you, though. Thank you, Lily. And so Brittany is going to step in, I think, and handle the Q&A. So, yep, there she is.
Yeah. Hi, guys. Okay, so the question with the most votes is something I'm going to save for the end for both of you. So the first question I'll read is from Liz, and she says, I was really interested in the deceptive structure of the novel. It seems quite traditional, but has a wonderfully uneven timing, spending equal time with small and large plot points, adding up to this unexpectedly emotional climax. Can you talk a little bit about your decisions with pacing and plotting?
Oh, I love it when people think, you know, that I've got it all figured out. It's really like, I always say I'm like a worm on the ground, you know, like I am not, I'm just completely going by instinct and, you know, trying to just kind of follow along with my imagination. I can't really explain it. Like I would get really self-conscious if I made it too much of a cerebral, made those decisions in terms of pacing, you know, made them intellectually. I think, you know, most of it just kind of, I just follow along what I want to do. And then, you know, in the second and third draft, I try to manipulate it a little bit more, but I'm often not very successful at changing huge chunks of it. I do remember the end is very fast. You know, the pacing of the end, it's all happening very quickly. And my editor and I really tried to work on slowing it down. But I had a hard time. I didn't really have anything to put in to slow it down. And so I'm not really sure I did actually slow it down all that much. And we did move things around here and there. One thing that that we kind of that wasn't in the first draft was a backstory at all. There was just a few references to the father, and then of course the father comes into the restaurant, but there wasn't a real story, you know, of her high school years, for example. And so I had to write those for a later draft. And I feel like, you know, that kind of settles it in that area a little bit, kind of slowed it down and changed the pacing a little bit. But otherwise it's a pretty sort of instinctive process.
So the next question is from Lacey, and she asks, if you could give Casey a piece of advice as a young female aspiring writer, what would it be?
I always say, just do it, like the Nike ad, you know. I think it's really, I know that I make a lot of excuses for not writing, a lot. I mean, I will think of anything as a reason not to write. And I think when I was younger, I did it more. Strangely, since I've had kids, I feel like it's focused me a little bit more. I think because my time was so limited once I had kids that I had to just do it. Otherwise, I wasn't going to not get another chance to just do it. And so I would say, really get in a routine, have your rituals, have your cup of tea that you drink, or, you know, your mug that you use, or your lucky scrunchie. I have a lucky scrunchie. It's orange. Sometimes I have a blue one that can also work in a pinch. And I think all of those things, writing at the same time every day, and really making yourself write, even if you're not in the mood at all, and you have a stomach ache and maybe a headache coming on, and your boyfriend just, you know, got really mad at you about something. I think, you know, write through everything as much as you can would be my advice. What about you, Paula? Do you have more to add?
I think I just thought, as you were speaking about how you reached over and picked up My Name is Lucy Barton from your desk, right? So I have them too. I have books around me all the time that I lean on, that I return to, that I use for inspiration, and also just to know it's there, to know they're there, to be inspired, and to feel grounded in the world of words. And obviously, right, we have our Bible.
That's really good advice. Another two that I always try to keep on my desk are The Evening of the Holiday by Shirley Hazard, which is actually mentioned in Writers and Lovers, and also To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. I can just pick those up any place, turn to any page, and remember why I write, why I love writing. You know. And what about you? What are some of the ones that you have right next to you?
Oh, goodness. So My Name is Lucy Barton is one of them. Actually, it's like one of my all-time favorite books. I also love Hours by Michael Cunningham. I can pick up that book and just fall in anywhere and be reminded, not just what a beautiful sentence is, but why we write, what we're trying to do, the depth of the connection we're striving for to reach into a human life and as a human consciousness, the story of being human. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I think there's also, as a second part to that question, there's also, in this time of quarantine and isolation, a sense of guilt for anyone who is a creative or a creator, that they're not motivated to create or to make. I think there's this idea that you're in isolation, you have all of this time.
Right.
And so there's a lot of guilt among creative people, I think, right now, where they're like, I'm just not in it right now to create. And they feel really guilty about that.
Yeah. I think that's very natural. First of all, at a time like this, anything you were working on seems irrelevant, and the world is gone as we know it. And of course it's not, you know, and either you'll go back to that or you'll start something else. I think it's important to keep a journal during times like this, because all the little things that seem kind of mundane to us right now, we're going to want to know what that was like and what we felt and what happened. I mean, I wish so much my journals were filled with just really mundane things, like what I ate and what I said, and I don't know, or, you know, what was said to me, and all the little details that I never, you know, my journal is always like, it's usually, I really turn to it when I'm having negative emotions of some kind. And so it's a lot of emotional. And then I go back to it, you know, 10 years later, and I'm like, who is Mike? Why was I, you know, in that park with her? It doesn't, I'm working out, like, you know, some emotional state that I'm in, and I'm like, no, I don't even know who these people are anymore. I just want you to tell me, like, you know, what lunch,
I think this idea of I'm supposed to be using this time in a different way, or I'm supposed to be feeling this, or I'm wasting this time. Here's the thing, we have more time, many of us do, or more time at home, but it doesn't feel like normal time. There's so much stress and anxiety and uncertainty and fear. And this is not the typical crucible, right? That breeds creativity and inspiration. Some people need to write in order to feel grounded, and some people need to feel grounded in order to write. And however you work inside, whoever you really are, you need to honor that person right now. These are extraordinary circumstances.
Yeah, exactly.
There is no supposed to.
What'd you say the last bit?
There is no supposed to right now. I don't think we need guilt on top of all the other difficult emotions swirling. We can give the guilt a rest, I think.
Yeah. And it really is, it really is a time of grief and a time of dread. And those are, very heavy emotions, and it's true, just to be kind to yourself. Right. To look out for your neighbor, and that sort of
My
thing.
dog has come in.
Oh, so cute.
Oh.
I should just have her up there.
Oh, there she is. Hello.
I think everyone could use a puppy right now. So
absolutely, she makes every day better, and I let her know to her face. Yeah,
that's really true.
Yeah.
Okay, our next question is from Nancy Johnson. She asked, could you have written this novel about the tension between life and art when you were in your 20s or 30s, or did you need time and distance to see it all more clearly?
I always need time and distance. I can't really write about my life as it's being lived in fiction. I don't know. I always need to reflect and look back and process. And no, I couldn't. I don't know how. I don't know. I sometimes feel like I don't give my life, the present life, like legitimacy. It only kind of becomes legitimate, many years after it was lived. I'm not sure why. I know there's some writers who can really just capture it right at that moment, and that's what they feel like doing. I don't work that way for some reason. At least I haven't.
What you were saying earlier was that the presence of grief in your life helped you it was a catharsis for you. It sort of led you to the page, and you could open up, this part of yourself that needed to be expressed. But the story you were telling was not your current story. It was back.
Yeah.
So, I think that makes all the difference, right? It makes all the difference. You take a present emotion and then you send it back in time, or you send it to someone else's body, or another time period, or something that gives you enough of a freshness and a gap. It introduces the unknown, and we have to have the unknown as well as the known in order for the imagination.
Right.
That's the food. That's the food for the imagination. It's what we don't know.
Yeah. And I love working with those two elements, and seeing how they kind of meld together with each novel. It's just a different balance and different mixture.
Okay, next question is from Thad. He asks, apart from your own experiences, what else influenced you in writing this particular story? Other characters in fiction, other authors, other stories?
It's always hard to know your influences, because so much is coming at you. And I read a lot of novels, and I can't really point to anything in particular. I mean, I'm sure that there must have been something that I was reading around the time that I got the idea for the novel that helped me, but I don't really know what it was. I mean, I just feel like it was really coming out of my my imagination and also that sort of reverberation of vulnerability that I was feeling.
Okay, and then we have Nancy, who asks, I loved the scenes of Casey working in the restaurant. I've never been a waitress, but it seems so hard and intense. Were those scenes from life experience?
Well, I definitely waited tables from, I don't know, like 82 to 97. Damn, that's a long time. It was, on and off, but a lot of on. Many different restaurants in North Carolina, New York, Cambridge. I'm sure other places Vermont, Maine, lots of different restaurants, and so it was sort of a amalgamation of a lot of carrying of trays and taking orders, and kind of experiencing that intensity. It's such a particularly intense job. You're on your feet for 8 hours. You've got so much stuff in your head, you've got to get the drinks and the dessert and then, check and everybody's looking at you, wanting things from you, and you're just racing around. And it's kind of the antithesis of writing, So she's passive, and she's, she has to make it all happen for herself in the morning, and then she has to just hit the ground running and race around. But it's kind of a nice time too, because you have so much, you can't think, you can't get caught up in your own kind of misery and thoughts most of the time, because you're really just have to get that food on the table or you don't get a tip.
I actually miss it. I still have waitressing dreams.
Me too.
All the time. And I miss the perfect balance. It gets you out of your head. You have to shower. You have to take off your lucky scrunchie and go to actual humans and put on lipstick and take a shower and then be out of your, out of that space that you.
It's also really excellent exercise. Like you really
10 miles a day. Yeah. Like you need to go to the gym. You're lifting all these plates and.
Exactly.
Yeah, there was great authority in those passages for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was so worried I wasn't going to be able to remember anything. But it came back little by little. At first, I was like, "Oh God, I can't do this." But it was
okay.
fun.
So our last question was what I was going to ask you anyway, and it's from Adela. Hopefully, I'm saying that right. And this goes out to both of you. What are you both reading during this time of quarantine?
You go ahead.
So what I'm reading right now is Dear Edward by Paula Mclean, which is a beautiful book about a boy who is a lone survivor of a catastrophic plane crash that kills his entire family and literally everyone on the plane. And I guess what I'm thinking of right now is, how do we survive what feels unsurvivable? How do we do more than survive? And how do we remember our humanity? How do we connect? How do we come back to ourselves? How do we deal with grief? How do we continue to grow through a time when it feels like it's impossible to do anything but just freeze and, wait for horrible things to happen? So it's been very, lots of tears. I think I need to cry too. So I don't want to read something funny right now. I want to feel moved. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. I loved that book.
Yeah, it's true.
I read that book when I was in galleys to my daughter who had just had her wisdom teeth out. And so we read it day after day. She was just on the couch with these really swollen cheeks. And it seems, it was just, even though, it sounds like it's, about a plane crash, there's so there's humor and there's life, and it's just such a pleasurable book. And we did have moments of like crying together. It was really sweet. I just love it. I treasure those days so much. Yeah. And so I read in the New York Times, you know, they did an article about comfort books, like what books are comforting. And Ruth Ware had said that she is reading Love in a Cold Climate by Nancy Mitford. It's Nancy, right? It's not Jessica who wrote that one. I've never read the Mitford sisters. I've never read anything about them, and I've never read their books. And so I'm reading Love in a Cold Climate. And the jury's out on that. Paula, have you read that?
I have not. I have not. Are you not feeling comforted yet?
Well, I'm not sure it's aging all that well. The jury really is out because I am only halfway through. It seems to be about a pedophile, and I don't really feel like people are acknowledging him as a pedophile, and I don't know where we're going, and so I can't say. But anyway, that's what I'm doing. And then I'm going to read These Truths by Jill Lepore. I should have read months ago, and I didn't, and now is my opportunity. Because all my conversations with my husband seem to, he's read it, and he talks about it, and I can't participate in it, and I don't like that. And it sounds just amazing in so many ways, so I'm really excited about it.
Yeah. Eerily enough, my book club, I have a book club with my block, and we had selected for this month's meeting, which couldn't meet because of social distancing, we had selected Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel about a pandemic that changes the world, and the symptoms, the fictional symptoms in the book are so eerily like the ones happening right now. It was just it's just this bizarre moment of like life imitating art, imitating life, and also just it almost seems like she was a prophet of a sort. And so
wow. And are you going to meet virtually? Are you going to figure that out?
I think we're going to Zoom it like everybody else.
Nice.
That's
really cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you both so much for being here. This was such a great conversation. Writers and Lovers is a perfect quarantine book. If I might read it again just because it's such it's a fast read, but there's so many layers to it. There's so much we can connect with Casey on. Just the notion that you want to find a big girl job and a stable job and something that has health insurance, but you also want to live your dreams and be the writer and the creative. And I think a lot of us, especially right now, are probably struggling with that kind of same conundrum. So make sure you guys buy the book. Again, the link is below. Also check out Paula's books. We have them on our website. Check out politics-prose.com to see what else we have coming up. We've got an event with Rebecca Solnit in April, Jonathan Karl, Veronica Roth, lots of other amazing ones. So thank you all so much for being here. We hope you'll tune in. And again, Lilly, Paula, thank you so much. Stay well.
Thank you all. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Brittany. And thank you, Politics and Prose.
Bye.
Thank you, guys. Good night.
Bye. Thanks. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.